Hitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padam Sahaguna Lalita Sri Vishaka becomes Cha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namosute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Brindavaneshwari Prishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So it's nice to be back with you all. I'm sorry I couldn't make last week. I was in New York for the Rath Yatra. And it was a very big Rath Yatra down Fifth Avenue. I was surprised so many devotees came because most of the devotees have been vaccinated. So it was a very big crowd. And Lord Jagannath was there in his full glory. And then there was a nice festival set up at something called Washington Square Park, where Prabhupada spoke also in 1976. So for me, it was also nice because it was the 45th anniversary of the time I saw Srila Prabhupada at New York Rath Yatra. And I think pretty much I've attended all 44 Rath Yatras since then. There wasn't one last year. But we would always somehow get to New York for Rath Yatra. So Prabhupada was very pleased with because Fifth Avenue is a very important, he said it's the most important street in the world. So he was very pleased that the Rath Yatra went down Fifth Avenue past the Empire State Building. And yeah, it was very nice. Very nice. A lot of devotees. Hare Krishna. So we are now starting the Nectar of Devotion introduction, which is a little bit more than an introduction. Prabhupada, it's actually, the beginning verses of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. And it would be good to just spend a minute. I think we maybe spoke about this a little bit in the preface, but to remind us all that this Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu is over 2,000 shlokas. So 2 or 3, it's almost like 3 times, if not 4 times as many shlokas as Bhagavad Gita. Right? And you know how thick Bhagavad Gita as it is, right? So the Prabhupada wrote this very early, 1970. Practically the full Bhagavad Gita was not available. No, Bhagavatam was not available. Chaitanya Charitamrita was not available. Krishna book was out. So this was not a full study of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. It would have been a very thick book and probably taken Prabhupada several years to finish, right? So this is a summary study. And of course, it has all the essence of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. But Prabhupada also takes some, what is the word we say? Some liberalities. He can add things to give certain emphasis. And of course, he's speaking to, he says that this book is for members of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And at that time, he's speaking to people who are very little understanding of, have very little access to Shastra. So it's good to, keep that in mind, that this is a summary study, a few hundred pages rather than many thousands of pages, like that. Okay. So Prabhupada begins by saying the word invoking auspiciousness. So what do you think invoking auspiciousness means in Sanskrit? Any idea?
Mangalacharan Prabhuji.
Very good. Mangalacharan, not Mangalacharan Prabhu, just Mangalacharan. Yes, Mangalacharana. Yeah. So invoking auspiciousness, and that's what Srila Prabhupada is doing. And what does he do right in the very beginning, just like Rupa Goswami? Lord Sri Krishna. So this is not a book about Lord Narayan. It's not a book about Lord Vishnu. It's not a book about Lord Varahadev, Lord Vamanadev. It's specifically about Krishna, the Krishna, Vrindavan Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the original Ekala Ishwar Krishna Arsabhritya, the original Godhead, H8 Changsakala Krishna's two, Bhagavan Swayam. So that's the, and he says, Lord Krishna is the cause of all causes. And this is very important, we're the reservoir of all rasas, because this is the Bhakti Ras Amrita, right? It's the, and then Prabhupada explains the different rasas, the 5 primary ones and the 7 secondary ones. And what he's doing here is he's paraphrasing the very first verse of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. That says that, and then he mentions the 5 different categories of gopis: Taraka, Palika, Shama, Lalita, and of course, ultimately Srimati Radharani. And he's saying that he's been impelled, he's been requested to write this by His Divine Grace, Sri Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada. So he offers obeisances to Rupa Goswami and to his guru. And then he says, this is a summary study of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. And he says how Rupa Goswami in his Mangalacharana offers his respectful obeisances unto Sanatan. And here Prabhupada says it's unto Sanatan Goswami. And other commentaries says it's a dual meaning, unto the eternal, Sanatana means eternal, Lord Krishna, and of course to his older brother and his guru, Sanatana Goswami. And he's saying that I pray that he will be very, Rupa Goswami is praying that he'll be pleased by this book. And similarly, Srila Prabhupada is praying that Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur will be pleased by this book. So, so a Mangalacharana has 3 purposes. It gives the goal or the objective of the book, and that was right there, Krishna. It has the obeisances, and it has the offering of benedictions to the readers. That will come to a little bit later. So then, and by the way, if you have any questions, just put them in the chat or go off of mute, because I'll cover a few things and then ask you if you have questions, but you can say them at any time. Okay, and we are now up to 45 attendees. Very good. Okay, so a little bit further. So then Prabhupada offers obeisances to all the great devotees and the acharyas, and he compares them to sharks in the great ocean of nectar, who do not care for the various rivers of liberation. It's very interesting. So sharks live only in the ocean. They refuse to, so there's 3 different ways to look at this point about sharks, that they don't reside in lesser bodies. And similarly, devotees relish the ocean of devotion and aren't attracted, well, we should not be attracted to lesser pleasures in life, other than the pleasure of the nectar of devotion, the Bhakti Ras Amrita. And the Sindhu, the ocean the nectar of devotion. So then Prabhupada says, impersonalists are very fond of merging into the Supreme, like rivers that come down and merge into the ocean. So the problem that the Mayavadis have, listen to this carefully, it's a little subtle, is they don't distinguish between the path of self-realization and the person who practices it, right? So if the path of self-realization is like a river, and the persons on the path are like the fish in the river, they're not the river itself. The river may merge into the ocean, but the fish in that river do not. They remain fish individually. So Prabhupada says, the impersonalists are dwelling in the river water, which eventually comes to mix in the ocean. They have no information, however, that within the ocean, as within the river, there are innumerable aquatic living entities. So the real goal of self-realization is not to merge with the Supreme, but to enter the realm, the spiritual world of the Supreme, where there is so much variety and individual living entities. So, and then the other point is that because the devotees, they swim very deep in the ocean of devotion, they're never caught by the fisherman's net or the prison of birth and death. So I looked into this, and generally speaking, no sharks go in rivers. There's one kind of shark, so it's not even, it's a question of even if they are a shark that sometimes enters a river. But generally speaking, sharks do not, because rivers are sweet water, and sharks like the salty water in the oceans, right? A very nice analogy that Rupa Goswami gives. Yeah. Any questions or comments on that? Oops.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavad Pranam.
Yes, Hare Krishna Mataji.
So if we understand this analogy that you have just explained, that devotees, pure devotees are like sharks, and impersonalists may be like other fishes.
No, the impersonalists are like the river merging into the ocean.
Okay. Oh, then I probably didn't understand the difference between the path and the person. So
right.
Explain that again. And then the next thing is,
let's do one at a time. How does that sound? Is that okay?
Yes.
So that's the point, that they don't. They don't make a distinction between the path and the person who's practicing the path.
Mm-hmm.
So if the path is a river, the persons on the path are like the fish, but they don't see themselves as fish. They kind of see themselves as the river merging into the ocean. And therefore Prabhupada says the impersonalists are dwelling in the river water, which eventually comes to mix with the ocean. They have no information, however, that within the ocean, as within the river, there are innumerable aquatic living entities. So these examples are not perfect, but that's the idea, that they see themselves as one with the river and merging into the ocean.
Okay. Because I was just thinking about, if the acharyas and pure devotees are sharks, do those individuals who are practicing other paths to self-realization or liberation, I mean, can you become a shark, or do you have to
Well, these are examples that, Prabhupada would often say that, metaphors are helpful to understand things, but they're not perfect. So, I guess we would consider people who aren't devotees to be more like, the smaller fish in the rivers and things that go into the ocean. But yes, by Guru's mercy and Krishna's mercy, everyone can be transformed into a shark. Now, a shark isn't always used as in a positive metaphor, but in this case they are, because they go very deep into the ocean. But maybe other times we'd like to consider devotees more like dolphins, so more peaceful, aquatic than a shark. Sometimes we even call people sharks, right? Yes. Oh, that person really cheated me. What a shark he is. But in this case, it's positive.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? Okay. So just give me a second, because I rebooted my computer. Just give me like 20 seconds. Okay, so now the next, let's continue. So now the next point is a very interesting description. And Prabhupada begins by saying Rupa Goswami prays to his guru to protect this book from the argumentative logicians who unnecessarily meddle in the science of service to the Lord. He compares their arguments to the logic to volcanic eruptions in the midst of the ocean. In the midst of the ocean, volcanic eruptions can do very little harm. And similarly, those who are against devotional service to the Lord and who put forward many philosophical theses about the ultimate transcendental realization cannot disturb the great ocean of devotion. So I thought we could again look at these. Look at this analogy, metaphor that Prabhupada is using here. It's very interesting. So here is an example of a volcano erupting in the ocean. If I can show it.
One of the most active undersea volcanoes in the world.
So you can see it's not very big, right? It's not like miles high or something. It's quite, even though it's a huge volcano, but it's under the water. Now, if we compare that to a volcano on the land, I think you get to see the difference.
Was reported to have been killed, but nearby airports and facilities had to be shut down for days until the ash subsided.
Oops. Oops. Look at that. Okay. So you get the idea. So you get the idea that so Prabhupada is saying in the in his writings that in the midst of the ocean, volcanic eruptions can do very little harm. So we can see the example of that. And actually 70 or 80% of all the volcanic eruptions in the world are in the ocean, actually. So similarly, the non-devotee speculators, they can't really do any serious harm to the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. So it's a nice example. Amol says, river here considered demigods and Krishna is considered as the sea here, as devotees are always preferred to be associated with Krishna. I'd have to, do you have a reference for that, Amol? It makes sense, but I don't remember reading that in, maybe I missed it. But if you have a reference for that, that would be great. But thank you for that. I was just reading the chat. Okay, so then Prabhupada gives a beautiful explanation or example of the mood of a devotee. He writes, the author of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Srila Rupa Goswami, very humbly submits that he is just trying to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world, although he humbly thinks himself unfit for this work. That should be the attitude of all preachers of the Krishna consciousness movement, following in the footsteps of Srila Rupa Goswami. We should never think of ourselves as great preachers, but should always consider that we are simply instrumental to the previous acharyas, and simply by following in their footsteps, we may be able to do something for the benefit of suffering humanity. So this is a very nice mood of devotion, that even if we have some huge success, even if every Supreme Court judge and MP member of parliament becomes a devotee and wears tilak because of our preaching, we still would, a good devotee would not take credit for that, but would give all praise to their spiritual master and to the previous acharyas for helping this to happen and take place. So that is our mood, to give credit and just try to be a humble servant. Shyam Kun Prabhu, you have a question or comment?
Prabhu, on one hand here, Rupa Goswami is saying, and Srila Prabhupada is saying here, that there are these logicians who meddle into the service of the Supreme Lord. We come in the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya, and a lot of the writings of the Madhvacharya, Sripada Madhvacharya and his followers, they depend upon the Nyaya school, like the Bhashya, etc., that Acharya has written, and the commentaries on that which others have written. I mean, that meddling of logic, it's in the same Vaishnava Sampradaya, and yet it looks like, hey, are we going against the spirit of Rupa Goswami? So we come in that Sampradaya, but there seems to be too much logic there. How do we process that?
Well, of course, Madhvacharya's logic and Nyaya is, it's either logic being used to establish the Vaishnava Siddhanta, or it's taking Nyaya and using it in Krishna's service or Vishnu's service, right? That's one point. So logic or Nyaya isn't necessarily bad. Prabhupada quotes Nyaya in chapter 10, verse 32 of the Bhagavad Gita. He talks about Vada, Jalpa, and Vitanda. And it's one of the pramanas, right? There's Shastra Pramana, there's Pratyaksha, and there's Anuman. Anuman is like logic, right? So it's one of the pramanas. It depends on in what service are we using Nyaya? Are we using it to come to an impersonal conclusion, or are we using it to establish Krishna consciousness? So that's one thing. And then this is not something that we we don't want to hurt the feelings of the Madhvas, but in our hearts, we understand that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to give the kind of the final conclusion of both Madhvacharya and Ramanujacharya by establishing Achintya Bheda, Abheda Tattva, right? That progression. It was interesting. It just so happens, it's interesting you bring this up, Prabhu, because on the Rath Yatra, I met a devotee who is studying the connection between Madhva and Gaudiya, because it's a question, right, about how we're, just like you're saying, there's other questions besides the emphasis on Nyaya about what's the connection. But he said something interesting. He said that verse Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhu Kavinoy Shavanadi Sudichite Kariya Udoy. It's a verse in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that says that Krishna Bhakti is already there in people's hearts, and it just has to be udoy, in Bengali, awoken by devotional service. And this devotee was saying that is that's exactly the same as what Madhva taught. And some other acharyas didn't teach quite like that, but he did. And so he saw that link, and he mentioned one other thing. I can't remember what it was, but I hope that's helpful, Shyam Kund Prabhu.
Yes, thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Neelam Tomar, I keep on looking at the picture of Steph Curry, the basketball player, on my screen. Okay. So what a beautiful paragraph we just read about Prabhupada's mood and Rupa Goswami's mood of humility and of service. So then Prabhupada describes how scientifically, or maybe that's not the right word, how well set up the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu is. That just like in an ocean, there's the north, south, east, and west, and then within those four divisions, there's different waves, he calls them, just like the ocean has waves. So we're only studying the eastern division. That's sufficient for Bhakti Shastri. But I will, at some point in our discussion, just at least give an overview of the other three parts of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So there's 4 waves in the Eastern Division that we'll be studying. One is Samanya Bhakti, or general devotional service, and then will be Sadhana, and then Bhava, and then Prema. The majority of the Eastern Division is on Sadhana. Prabhupada gives 2 chapters, if I recall, to Bhava and 1 to Prema, if I recall properly. And Sadhana is divided into Vaidhi and Raganuga. And of course, there's no need to note that now. We'll be going into that in a lot of detail, but just to give you some idea. So this is, so now Prabhupada is just about to begin with Samanya Bhakti, or general devotional service. And he says here, in the first part, which is the Eastern wave, there are 4 waves. The same thing I was saying. The first being the general description of devotional service. The second concerns the regulated principles for executing devotional service, which is sadhana. The third wave is devotional service in ecstasy, bhava. And in the fourth is the ultimate goal, love of God, prema. These will be explicitly described along with different symptoms. So now, Prabhupada begins his description of one of the most important verses in Krishna consciousness. And so I'm going to show you it in its original form. Anyabhilasita sunyam. I hope you can see that. Jnana karmad yanavritam anukulyena Krishna anu silanam bhaktir uttama. So anya abhilasita sunyam, without desires other than those to serve for the service of Lord Krishna, or without material desires such as those for meat eating, illicit sex, gambling, and addiction to intoxicants. Gyan means knowledge or philosophy of monist mayavadis. Karma, fruits of activities. Adi means literally, etc. Right? By artificial practicing detachment, by the mechanical practice of yoga, by studying the Sankhya philosophy, and so on. And then anavritam is an important word which we'll discuss, not covered. All of these are important words. Anukulyena means favorable. Krishna anusilanam, cultivation of service and relationship to Krishna. And sometimes it probably would include cultivation of service and relationship to Krishna by following the previous acharyas. And then bhakti uttama, first-class devotional service. So when first-class devotional service develops, one must be devoid of all material desires, knowledge obtained by monistic philosophy, and fruit of action. The devotee must constantly serve Krishna favorably as Krishna desires. And Prabhupada says that this verse is from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the 11th verse. I don't think we'll read this purport now, but maybe a little later. So that is the verse that Prabhupada is paraphrasing here, and he goes to some length about it. Now, there are different parts of it. The primary characteristics of bhakti are anukulyena Krishna anusilanam, that one should perform devotional service favorably, anukuli, and following in the footsteps of the previous acharyas. And then the secondary part of the verse, I'll show you the verse again so you can be looking at it as we're talking about it. Anyabhilashita sunyam. So anya means other, right? Abhilas means desire. And this is an important little thing here. You see this ta? That means, how should let me just look at my notes so I can explain it nicely, hopefully. Computer's not helping me. Okay, so Anyabila, if you can still see that, I assume. Anyabila sita. So the ta means in general consciousness. So generally, we should perform our bhakti with no other desire except serving Krishna. So what it means by general is, let's say, you're in a car and it looks like you're going to have a car crash, and you say, "Krishna, help!" Right? So you're not exactly thinking of Krishna's pleasure at that time. You're not, right, which is pure devotional service. But at least you're thinking of Krishna. So the ta means like generally in our general consciousness. So in our general consciousness, other desires should become sunyam. Or as Prabhupada would say in his Bengali accent, zero instead of zero. And then the next line describes what those are. And it says, Jnana, karma, adi. Adi, remember, means etc. Or here Prabhupada says, artificial detachment, yoga, Sankhya philosophy, and then he says, and so on. So it should not be anavritam. It should not be covered by our bhakti should not be covered by these things. We may still, just like Prabhuji just asked that question about nyaya. So we may use nyaya to increase our faith or in preaching Krishna consciousness, but we don't let that cover our main thing, which is bhakti. And similarly, karma. For example, Lord Chaitanya, he performed the Shraddha ceremony for his father. Now, a devotee on one level doesn't need to do that because it's a karma kandik kind of thing, and one just by practicing bhakti, as it says in the Prahlad Maharaj pastime, one liberates so many generations going forward, going backwards, etc. But one can do these. One may do these different fruitive things as long as it doesn't anavritam, it doesn't cover our bhakti. So obviously for Lord Chaitanya, it didn't cover his bhakti. He just did it to pacify people who thought that it was only appropriate that the son does that, right? So for social reasons, but it didn't. But it wasn't. It wasn't that he was thinking, "Oh my God, if I don't do this, my father's not going to get the pinda, and he's gonna, he's going to go to hell, or whatever." No, because the devotee knows that if the devotee just focuses on bhakti, it's the best thing he can do or she can do for their family members, even many generations going forward or going backwards. So this is considered the secondary because it's what not to do. And then this is considered the primary or what to do. So anukul yena, to do things that are favorable for bhakti. And that means, although Kamsa was always thinking of Krishna out of fear, and Shishupal was always thinking of Krishna out of envy, it wasn't anukul. It wasn't favorable. Mm-hmm. So we want to think of Krishna favorably and serve Krishna favorably. And it's not just serve favorably, but to whom? Specifically to Krishna. To Krishna. And Anushilanam, well, this actually, it probably doesn't translate it here, but Anushilam literally, to follow in the footsteps of those who have the right service attitude. That's one way to translate it. So, and that's called Bhaktir Uttamam. So this is perhaps we could say the most important verse in Krishna consciousness. It's certainly in the top 5. It's very, very important because it really defines for us what is Uttama Bhakti and what is not Uttama Bhakti. And it can help us work towards that. So in the purport, or in the in the book, Prabhupada starts going. He says generally people are engaged in different activities to get some material profit. So that's karma. While most philosophers are engaged in proposing transcendental realization through volumes of word jugglery and speculation, that's gyan. Pure devotional service must always be free from such fruitive activities and philosophical speculations. In the next paragraph, the particular word used by Srila Rupa Goswami in this connection is anusilana, or cultivation by following, there it is, the predecessor teachers, acharyas. As soon as we say cultivation, we must refer to activity. Without activity, consciousness alone cannot help us. All activities may be divided into 2 classes. One class may be for achieving a certain goal, and the other may be for avoiding some unfavorable circumstance. Then Prabhupada says in Sanskrit, these activities are called pravritti and nivritti, positive and negative actions. There are many examples of negative action. For instance, a diseased person has to be cautious and take medicine in order to avoid some unfavorable illness. So this point about it's active, it's a cultivation, it's an activity, is important. Rishikesha Sevanam Bhakti Urtam. We engage these senses that we have in the service of the master of the senses. So our eyes, our ears, our nose, our taste buds, these are all things that have gotten us in trouble in so many different species of life. But instead of rejecting them, we now engage them in activity favorable. So we use our eyes to see the beautiful form of Krishna. We use our ears to hear the transcendental sound of Krishna's name. We use our tongue to taste Krishna prasadam instead of some bhoga. Right? It's all about an activity of using the senses in Krishna's service, including the sixth sense, which is the mind. Okay, so continuing to explain this verse. So then Prabhupada, in the next purport, next paragraph, talks about the activities. Those who are cultivating spiritual life and executing devotional service are always engaged in activity. Such activity can be performed with the body or with the mind. And by his mind, this is a little later, and by his mind, a Krishna conscious person always thinks of the activities of the Lord as he is speaking on the battlefield of Kurukshetra or engaged in his various pastimes in Vrindavan with his devotees. In this way, one can always think of the activities and pastimes of the Lord. This is the mental culture of Krishna consciousness. Then he says, similarly, we can offer many services with our bodily activities, but all such activities must be in relationship with Krishna. So we engage our mind in Krishna's service. We engage our body in Krishna's service. We both. And there's a connection there in the 8th chapter, 7th verse of the Gita, which I think I've quoted before to you. Krishna says, Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mamanu smara yudhyacha. He says to remember me, so that's the mind, and then yudhya, do your duty with the body. So we want to do that. That should be the steps. First, engage the mind and be in a devotional mindset, then do the activity. So get our consciousness right and then do the activity. Okay, so I've said a lot of things. Some questions or comments on any of these things? What do you think?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, I have it's a little bit of contradiction that is coming when you refer to the 1.1.11 verse from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and you are giving example of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu offering Shrad for his father, and on the other hand, you said that a devotee need not do these, let's say, karma kandi activities. In Ramayana, we also hear, Lord Rama performing oblations for his father when he hears from Bharat that Darshak Maharaj has passed away. Now, when Lord Rama, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, their Lord himself, are performing these activities, and on the other hand, it says devotees did not perform it. So how do we understand and implement these contradictions?
Well, it's not a contradiction, hopefully. We may also do for the same reason that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did, to excuse me, to avoid criticism and to follow the culture, the local culture, which, so he would have been greatly criticized if he hadn't done that. Like, what kind of son are you, right? So it's explained that he did for that purpose, but not with in other words, his faith was never deviated from the definition of pure bhakti. And the only thing I have to do in this life is to do pure devotional service to Krishna. And so he wasn't thinking, oh, I have to do this because it'll help me, it'll help just by being a devotee, I'm helping my father or mother, in unlimited ways. So we may also do, I didn't grow up in that culture. So my mother, she passed away in Vrindavan. She lived with us and left this world in Vrindavan. So as the son, of course, we went on the procession to the Jamuna, and I lit the fire, as was my duty. And also, I think it was 13 days. I can't remember. We had a feast for my mother's, in my mother's memory. And just a small group of people. There's not that many people knew my mom. We had some remembrance, not like a big thing. But that was that. And my brother was living in America, and he didn't know what happened. I just told him our mom passed away, and I took care of the funeral rites. So I didn't have to worry, about those things. That wasn't part of my. And my brother doesn't know what Shraddh is, right? What to speak of, right? But you may be in a different situation, right? Yeah. Where you're living and the culture you're in. So the main point that I'm trying to make is the point about that our faith, our refuge, our shelter is in bhakti and to Krishna, and we may do this or that. Just like you may have a job in order to maintain your family. You can't just immediately take sannyas and give up this world, right? And so you try to connect that with Krishna. So I think that's the point that this example is given of Lord Chaitanya doing the Shraddh ceremony, but that it wasn't where he had his faith.
So would it be okay to say or accept that sometimes if customary we have to do certain actions which may not be in line with our faith or belief or anything for that matter, is it okay to do that?
Yes, well, we have to gauge our consciousness, right? And we want to be careful not to, just like one of the offenses against the holy name is consider the chanting of holy name to be one of the auspicious ritualistic activities offered in the Vedas as fruitive activities, karma kanda. So we don't compare the two. But we can even find a way, just like for my mom's funeral, we had a beautiful kirtan all the way down to the Jamuna. And we took the body around Krishna Balaram Mandir and that whole thing. And so that was, that was auspicious. I remember one time, I was with Burijan Prabhu, and I can't remember if it was the Namkarana ceremony, or if it was a wedding, but as we were leaving, he said, the holy name, the fact that there was chanting going on the whole time, that's sufficient. You don't need anything else. But we do these other things, they make a impression. Just like Prabhupada said, he even wrote this in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, that the most important part of the installation of Krishna and Balaram in Vrindavan was the chanting of the holy name, was the Sankirtan. But he said we did all of this other, rituals and things to satisfy the local Brijvasis, who otherwise would have criticized us. But he said, but from my point of view, the holy name was sufficient. So that might be a good example for you, Prabhu, there, because Prabhupada himself did that. Although if you can see, and Prabhupada, he's like this with Krishna, right? So he had his kurta on when he was offering the first arti. We always wear a chadar and all that, but he just. I think that's a good example in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Is that all right, Prabhu?
Sure, thank you.
Yeah.
Prabhu, I am sorry. To continue with the doubt raised by Rasasindhu Prabhu, I want to ask Prabhu. See, doing this karma activities, these are all not necessary for very exalted and pure devotees who are, is for them it is not necessary. But for ordinary people like us, oh, this is definitely, it has to be done. I read somewhere, Prabhu, is it? Yeah, I mean, I don't consider myself as such an exalted, and many of us are not, definitely not, that giving up completely the material desires and having reached that stage. Many of us are not. If for such people, I feel that whatever our shastras and religious and says it has to be performed. I read somewhere, Prabhu, kindly you can enlighten me if my understanding is right.
No, you're making a very good point, Prabhu. You're making a good point that we don't try to imitate the great souls, we try to follow in their footsteps. But if we, for example, let's say at a Shraddha ceremony, the focus is the chanting of the holy name, then that's also, combining Krishna consciousness with, maybe you could say, our level of Krishna consciousness at this time. Now, we are all different levels of mangoes. Some of us may be very green. Some of us are now becoming ripe. But the point is that a green mango is not going to remain green. Is that right?
Yes.
The green mango, even if you just, it will progress to become very ripe. So we may be a little green, different. Everyone on this call is a different shade of color, from green to ripe. Now, of course, the green mango is also, you can make nice sabji out of that, right? Yes. Sometimes. So we can be also very useful. So what you're bringing up a really important point, and it's a little subtle, because we want, even at our stage now, to be focused our faith on bhakti so that we can progress in bhakti. But I also see your point that we don't want to prematurely think, well, I'm like, this liberated soul, and therefore I don't have to do anything except, chant 64 rounds a day or something like that. And we may not have the adhikar, the eligibility to do that. So therefore, it's always good to have some trusted devotees to guide us on the path, who know us and who we trust, and they trust us, and we can reveal our mind to them, and they can give us good advice. Because you're bringing up a subtle point. Because on one hand, we want to have our faith in bhakti. On the other hand, we don't want to think we're Narada Muni.
Yes. Yes.
So thank you for that. Very, very nice point. But
thank you.
But Rasa Sindhu Giridhari Prabhu, he's very exalted. He doesn't.
No, bro, no way.
I wish I should have reached that stage.
Yes. Other questions or comments? And if Varda Krishna Prabhu, if you want to add anything, please always feel free to, as our senior devotee here. Okay, so we can then continue a little further on this beautiful introduction. So then Prabhupada talks about this, what do we say, Anukulyena, Krishna Anusilanam, following, so and there Prabhupada talks about the need for taking initiation. The connection with the spiritual master is called initiation. From the date of initiation by the spiritual master, the connection between Krishna and a person cultivating Krishna consciousness is established. So that's important. And then Prabhupada gives a little philosophy in the next paragraph, Sambandha Gyan. He says, cultivating Krishna consciousness is not material. And then he talks about how the Lord has three energies: the external energy, Maya, the internal energy, Antaranga Shakti, and then the internal energy is Samvit, Sandini, and Ladini. It's divided into three. And then the marginal energy, which is us. So the living entities are called marginal energy, and the material cosmic manifestation is the action of the external or material energy. Then there is a spiritual world, which is a manifestation of the internal energy. The living entities who are called marginal energy perform material activities when acting under the inferior external energy. And when they engage in activities under the internal spiritual energy, their activities are called Krishna conscious. So we are this tatasta lakshanam. Tata is like the, when you're on the bank of a river, you're not in the river and you're not on the land. You're in the middle. And so we have to decide which energy we're going to take shelter of. Right? And Krishna says, Mahatmanas tumam partha daivim prakritim asrita. That we should asrita, we should take shelter of daivim prakritim, the spiritual energy. But so this is beautiful sambandha again. There's basically these three energies: material, spiritual, and the living entity. And then the fourth one is Krishna, who's the source of everything. This is also explained in chapter 7, verse 4 of the Gita. Krishna first says, Bhumir apo nalo vayu kangmano buddhir evacha. He said, earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and ego. These are my bhinna prakritir, my separated energy. And then he says, aparayasi tas tvangyam prakritim vidime pram jiva bhuta mahabaho yayedam dayate jagat. He says, but besides this, there is the spiritual energy, but is marginal, us, the living entities. And then he says, beyond that, he's the source of both. So, somebody wrote me a direct thing, previous verse number? I'm not sure. Oh, Mahatmanastamam Partha. Is that 913 or 912? I don't remember actually the verse number. Maybe somebody can find it. 913. Oh, there you go. I was lucky. I got it right. And the ones that I just quoted was 74, 75, and 76, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. And then Prabhupada spends the next paragraph focusing on Krishna. And that, remember, we said that the very first, verse in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu says, it's Krishna, it's Krishna, it's Krishna. And then he says that when we speak of Krishna, we refer to the Supreme Personality of God along with his many energies. Krishna, in other words, means everything and includes everything. And then generally, however, we should understand Krishna to mean Krishna and his personal expansions. Krishna expands himself as Baladev, Sankarsana, Vasudev, Aniruddha, Pradyumna, Rama, and Singha, and Braha, as well as many other incarnations and innumerable Vishnu expansions. And then Prabhupada then he says, the next paragraph, devotional service means to prosecute Krishna conscious activities which are favorable, anukul, to the transcendental pleasure of the Supreme Lord Krishna. And any activities which are not favorable to the transcendental favor of the Lord cannot be accepted as devotional service. For example, great demons like Ravana, Kamsa, Hiranyakashipu were always thinking of Krishna, but they were thinking of him as their enemy. This sort of thinking cannot be accepted as bhakti or Krishna consciousness. Because we know Kamsa was always thinking of Krishna. Have you ever been in a conflict with somebody or upset at somebody and you just think of them so more intensely usually than you think of Krishna? Right? That's what it's like. So that, gives us some idea, but that is not how we're supposed to use our thinking process. So Kamsa was very Krishna conscious. Very, very. but it wasn't anukul. It wasn't favorable. It was fearful, and he was trying his best to kill Krishna, quite unsuccessfully, of course.
Just one doubt, may I ask you, Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhu.
Why the word, of course, it's only English probably, why the word prosecute has been used in this verse? Prabhu?
Yeah.
Because prosecute, as a normal human being, we think that some institute some legal proceedings against something like that. At the time you use the word, but there must be some meaning. Prabhupada has used the word. I'm very curious to know from you.
I was thinking the same thing as I was reading it. Well, here, okay, so this might help us. Let's look at the where to go? The dictionary definition. Okay, so prosecute. The first one is, like you said, institute legal procedures against a person or organization. But look at this. Continue with a course of action with a view to its completion. So you can see Prabhupada knew English very well, because that is a perfect description, isn't it? Right? Continue with a course of action with a view to its completion. And Prabhupada used, what did he say? He said, where was it?
Devotional service means to prosecute Krishna conscious activities which are favorable to the transcendental pleasure of the Lord.
Very good. So actually, he was using the word perfectly in its second definition, but not in the legal one. Excellent.
Thanks, Prabhu. Thanks.
Yeah.
Prabhu, one more comment or question here.
You should thank Shriman Dictionary, Prabhu. Yes. From Sadanand Prabhu and Naveen Gopika Mataji. That one? Is that the question?
You can address those questions, then I'll ask my question after that.
Yeah, TK. Is it okay to understand devotee take shelter of Krishna and not the internal energy or spiritual energy? We actually, if you want to get a little deep, we are more interested in the internal energy than Krishna. We're more interested in Srimati Radharani, who is the personification of the Ladini Shakti, or the internal energy, because she is the bestower of bhakti. And if she's pleased, then Krishna's like, you already won the game. Krishna just melts because he's totally subservient to Srimati Radharani. So in general, we want to please Krishna, yes, or we want to please Radha Krishna, right? Or Radha Govinda, or Radha Shama Sundar. Here in Washington, D, it's Radha Madan Mohan. The personification of the, so we do take Daivim Prakriti Masrita, literally ultimately means to take shelter of Srimati Radharani. And that means to take shelter of devotional service. So there's three things. There's the Bhakta, there's Bhagavan, and there's Bhakti, which connects the two. And Srimati Radharani is the personification of Bhakti. I hope that's helpful. Yes, there's another question. You're on mute if you're talking.
Yes, sorry. So we read this, the demons like Ravana, Kamsa, and these demons were always thinking of Krishna as well. So in the negative way of Krishna consciousness. But we also know that these demons were actually Jaya and Vijaya, who take that form, and Lord gives them that option that either take 3 births or 7 births to come back,
right,
and serve him, and they choose to take 3 births in an inimical way and go back faster. So is it then favorable Krishna consciousness that they chose 3 inimical births and 7 favorable births?
It was favorable for them, but it's not an example that we should follow. So it was very intelligent for them. And of course they got to, it's all Krishna's arrangement. You know, it's said that Krishna likes to have a good fight, but you know, in the spiritual world, there's no, who's he gonna fight with? So, so it was favorable for them. They were more quickly reinstated, but we don't want to follow in their footsteps. We can get some inspiration that, oh, I mean, I have no devotion. I mean, Kamsa's not, you know, he's a demon and he's thinking of Krishna so intensely. If only I could think of Krishna so intensely, anukul yena, in a favorable way.
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? All right, so we're almost done with this. We're doing good with time and everything. 1 second, let me find. The impersonalists sometimes misunderstand devotional service in such a way that they divide Krishna from his paraphernalia and pastimes. The devotees, however, also know that the battlefield of Kurukshetra by itself has nothing to do with their business. But in addition, they know that Krishna does not mean Krishna alone. He is always with his associates and paraphernalia. So sometimes paraphernalia is called tvadiya. And sometimes Tulsi Devi is called tvadiya. Or so the things in relation to Krishna are as important in some ways as Krishna. Krishna's devotees, for example, Krishna's abode, Krishna's temple. So this is an important point that also separates us from Mayavadis. And when we see Krishna's paraphernalia, like for example, or tadiya, those that are dear to Krishna, increases our bhakti. Just like if a mother doesn't, you know, they're not with their child, but they see the small shoes of the child, their devotion to the child, that, you know, it brings out some love in their heart for that child. So similarly, this is an important point that we'll discuss more later on, but just that we don't think Krishna is great and Kurukshetra is Maya, but rather that anything in connection to Krishna is well, we wouldn't say it's Krishna, but it is tadiya, it is dear to Krishna, and therefore dear to us. So of course, Vrindavan is most dear to Krishna. Tulsi Devi is most dear to Krishna, or Vrinda Devi. Krishna, you know, just like the spiritual master, we you know, his shoes, his sitting place, etc. You know, we don't have anyone sitting on Prabhupada's Vyasasana, right, in any of our temples. It's his paraphernalia, we could say, or the Maha Prasadam, right, of a great devotee. It's Maha Prasadam if it comes off the altar, and if he has eaten some of it, it's Maha Prasadam, right? So these things that are connected, this is a very personal way of seeing the world, is to see the connection, the Krishna Sambandha with everything. Okay, anything on tadiya? Okay, just call out if you do. Then skipping a paragraph, I'm going to read this whole paragraph. The definition of a pure devotee as given by Rupa Goswami in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu can be summarized as thus. So again, Prabhupada summarizing 1.1.11. His service is favorable and is always in relation to Krishna. Krishna Anusula. In order to keep the purity of such Krishna conscious activities, one must be freed from all material desires and philosophical speculation. Jnana, karma, anavrita. Any desire except for service to Krishna is called material desire. And philosophical speculation refers to the sort of speculation which ultimately arrives at a conclusion of voidism or impersonalism. That's a nice definition, by the way. If sometimes you'll be asked, well, what do you mean by Gyan? I thought, Gyan can mean knowledge. So it's a very nice sentence. And philosophical speculation refers to the sort of speculation which ultimately arrives at a conclusion of voidism or impersonalism. This conclusion is useless for a Krishna conscious person. Only rarely by philosophical speculation can one reach the conclusion of worshiping Vasudeva Krishna. This is confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita itself, and that is chapter 7, verse 19. The ultimate end of philosophical speculation, then, must be Krishna, with the understanding that Krishna is everything, the cause of all causes, and one should therefore surrender unto him. If this ultimate goal is reached, then philosophical advancement is favorable. But if the conclusion of philosophical speculation is voidism or impersonalism, it is not bhakti. So that was Gyan. And now talking about karma. Karma or fruitive activities are sometimes understood to be ritualistic activities. So there we're talking about Shraddha, et cetera, et cetera. There are many persons who are very much attracted by the ritualistic activities described in the Vedas. But if one becomes attracted simply to ritualistic activities without understanding Krishna, his activities are unfavorable for devotion, Krishna consciousness. Actually, Krishna consciousness can be based simply on hearing, chanting, remembering, etc. So we should, even if we do some of the ritualistic activities, we should do them with our understanding of Krishna intact and the relative nature of direct bhakti, like hearing and chanting, with some of these ritualistic activities. Okay, so that's pretty much it. That's the end of the points that I wanted to make about the introduction. Some other questions or comments? Okay, so I just want to get you prepared for next week's homework. Just give me a minute here. Okay, so next week we are going to cover chapter 1. So there should be some homework questions, and please read the entire chapter. So if there's not any questions, we can end a little early. Nothing wrong with that. Nobody complains usually about things ending early. They complain about things ending late.
Vardhakrishna Prabhu, do you have anything to add, comment, or question? Vardhakrishna Prabhu, you're on mute if you're trying to speak.
When I grew up in Krishna consciousness, I think this was quite really one of my favorite books, Nectar of Devotion. One of the sections that I loved was chapter 1 and the what happens when one begins Krishna consciousness, Kleshagni, Shubhada. I can't tell you how many times I've used the contents of the first chapter when I preach. I find those references extremely inspirational. And people like to be reassured that time and again that they're on the right path and Krishna will take care. That little thing that Krishna will take care is so reassuring. And then we kind of allegorically compare Bhakti, Krishna, to being a real father. Just as a loving father will take care, Krishna will take care. And things will happen, good things will start happening, you'll burn up your karma, etc. But how can we call this as a fruitive approach? I mean, to this day, I find these statements very reassuring that I'm on the right path. And actually, every time I read them, I become more grateful to Prabhupada for picking me up from where I was and going up this route. Can we say these are fruitive mentality?
What is a fruitive? What can we say? What is a fruitive mentality? Prabhu?
Well, in anticipation of something good.
Oh, no, I mean, it's like one time Burijan Prabhu said to Prabhupada, Prabhupada, we don't want to go back to Godhead. We want to just stay here and serve you birth after birth. And Prabhupada said, don't make me come back to save you. So this is kind of also connected to what Ramakrishna and Prabhu had said before. We're not, in other words, Prabhupada was kind of criticizing a immature statement, a statement by an immature devotee of a very exalted consciousness, right? So, and he was saying, yeah, there's nothing wrong with desiring to go back to Godhead. But our main point, as you know, Bharata Krishna Prabhu, is we just want to do our activities in a way that pleases Krishna. It's as simple as that. Bhakti is actually really simple. Simple for the simple, difficult for the crooked, Srila Prabhupada said. So that's our gauge of fruitiveness or not fruitiveness. But if we're looking out for, if we're considering our welfare is to do bhakti, I don't see anything wrong with that. Like that, because we say, like I've seen on the side of the book distribution vans in Delhi that, chant Hare Krishna and you'll become free from all anxieties. So for a pure devotee, becoming free from anxiety is not the goal. Matter of fact, they often take on anxieties in Krishna's service, right? But still, I don't think what you're saying, Prabhu, is fruitive at all. It seems very nice. Anything else?
Thank you for clarifying. But somehow I find that when somebody walks in typically and they want to talk to you, they have a burden on their shoulder, they have a burden in their mind, their anxiety, their fear, their helplessness. Kali Yuga being what it is, takes its toll.
Yes.
So very often, I guess that even if one were to call it a little fruitive, maybe it's quite okay to start your bhakti with that kind of a sentiment, and as you progress, maybe you'll stop worrying so much about yourself or your how you're doing personally as a person financially. You'll stop worrying, and you'll start worrying more for Krishna and for your Guru's mission. This will become an insignificant part of your consciousness. What's happening to you and your family or your finances, and you'll get more and more absorbed with your Guru's mission. So that's just postscript to what I did.
Yeah, that's very nice, Prabhu. And at the same time, again, kind of in connecting with Ramakrishna Prabhu's point earlier, that we may not be on that level. And the reality is that as much as we just say, do everything for Krishna and Guru's pleasure, the reality is that there's the mind, like Prabhupada writes that the mental disturbances in Kali Yuga are worse than the physical ones. The mental diseases are worse than the physical ones in Kali Yuga. So, in a practical level, we may have to deal with anxieties, fears, the death of a loved one, and all of these things, and deal with that kind of emotional level of life, so that if we can deal with that in a healthy way, we can then focus on our bhakti. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that until one reaches the level of bhava, one needs to be concerned about their physical health, their emotional health, their intellectual health, and of course their spiritual health. Those four things. So on the practical level, like you're saying, Varda Krishna, on the practical level, we're here to sometimes help people overcome their anxieties or their challenges in life so that they can refocus on Krishna. And also show that another thing Prabhupada wanted us to shows that how Krishna consciousness can help all of the different kleshas, all the different problems that come up in life, the mental anxieties, the physical anxieties, etc. Is that all right, Prabhu?
Oh yeah, Prabhu. It's just that I have one more question, but maybe you can deal with it the next class or whichever class you choose to. Now, at one end, we have books like Nectar of Devotion and Rupa Goswami's teachings and how they lived as one type of a role model. But the other end is that it seems like there is a subtle pressure, peer pressure, whatever you may refer to it, that we step out and start doing certain, at least in emergencies, certain humanitarian type of work. Now, sometimes I have this dilemma because COVID and a lot of people expect you to do so many things.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's right. Yeah.
So maybe at some time I want you to talk about it. Where do we draw the line, or is there a line at all? Or just do it and quietly and forget about it and don't let it be the most.
Well, it's very much a time, place, and circumstance question. Of course, distributing prasadam is not just feeding someone's stomach. It's giving them help. And I saw at least in Florida in the Krishna House, they were cooking every day. Usually they have this great program called Krishna Lunch, where they serve over 1,000 plates of prasadam every day to the students, and the students all pay, I think, $5. So they make $5,000 a day prasadam. But during COVID, it shut down. So what they did was they just started cooking. They still cooked, and then they made packaged prasadam and distributed that at all the hospitals to all the workers. And they got front page articles in the paper, and some donors who are not devotees came forward and gave big donations. So they really got a lot of favorable moods toward, and it was prasadam distribution. So just as a general thing, we would try to do things in a way that may pacify people and also have a spiritual component to it as much as possible, right? Because we have what do they call it in marketing? USP, unique selling point, right?
Yes.
What is it called?
Unique selling proposition.
Yeah, okay. So our USP, of course, is Krishna consciousness. So many people can feed people, so many people can clothe people, so many people can do so many things. But our special, unique, well, I don't know, you could say unique, that may be a little proud, because we don't want to say all the other sampradayas are useless, but we have such a preaching spirit. So our unique thing is Prabhupada's books, prasadam, sankirtan, things like that. So we try to find a way to connect those, because also here in Washington, D.C., people were expecting us naturally to do some things for the betterment of humanity. So we did that through prasadam. Okay, so
Very interesting. I have a couple of more questions, but I think I'll reserve them for the next class.
Bagme, yeah, after some time. Okay, so I think our time is up for today. It's very nice to see you all again. And Krishna willing, we will be back together the same time next week. Chapter 1 of the Nectar Devotion. Please read it and do the homework assignment. Thank you, Prabhus. Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha.
Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namo.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Premdata Prabhu.
Yes, Prabhu.
Any announcements for today?
I think that's the same announcement which we are doing every week, is that you please complete your assignments. I think NOI we want to finish and send it forward for evaluation. So I still see there are maybe Vara Prabhu can give the exact numbers, but there are still devotees who have not submitted their shlokas and 8, 9, 10 and 11 shlokas assignments. And then open book questions are pending for lots of devotees. So this need to be completed by this week, and so that it can be open for evaluation, and so that NOI is closed, because otherwise the pending things will continue, because NOD every week one new assignment will be opened up. So then it will become a very, very from management aspect, it will become very difficult to keep up our pending things, basically winding up. So we want to wind up NOI ASAP, so that requires cooperation from all of you to please submit your homework assignments and open book questions. So those who have not done, please are requested to do. We were also planning that NOD homework assignments will be sent 1 week prior, but that evaluation and checking up can only be done if we finish off our NOI. So the whole purpose of NOD homework assignments being given prior to the session was because Vraj Vihari Prabhu felt that devotees are not coming with the they are not reading prior to the session. So when we do homework assignment, the idea is that we will read and we will then write the homework assignment. So but that can only happen when we finish up all our pending things. So these pending things will keep piling up if we don't get the we don't get the cooperation from all of you. So those who have not done are requested to finish positively by this week.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Since it's been a significant gap between the classes, it may be helpful to let everybody know who has not completed their assignment, because we may be thinking
Yes.
we've completed it and not be working on it.
Yes, Vara Prabhu will do that work today.
And we are submitting the assignments to you, Prabhu, or who are we supposed to send the documents to?
That is the forms being Shankpani Prabhu is sending the forms. Mataji.
The Google forms that he sends.
Google forms, yes.
Okay, so even for the open book, we're submitting
Yes.
a Google form? Okay.
Yeah, that's
Yes,
also
yes.
Google form. Yeah, he's already shared maybe a few weeks ago. We can probably reshare the link on open book again with the whole.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Can you
Hare
hear
Krishna,
me?
Prabhu.
Yes, sir.
Prabhuji, so the list is ready, Prabhuji, for assignment number 9, 10, and 11. There are 10 devotees who are yet to complete, and I'll be sharing the list, soon after this call. And for open book test, we have got only 37 devotees who have completed. So we have a, like Prabhu said, we have a big number of devotees completed. So, yeah, apart from that, shloka recitation is something that also we need to check. So I will be sharing the details after this. Thank you.
Sure.
Hare Krishna.
Sure. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Pranavallu Prabhu, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Actually, this open book questions, can we submit as a document, Prabhu, instead of putting it in Google Drive,
Prabhu,
Google form?
document
Because again, we have to. Yes.
You finish your question, then I'll let us.
No, at the Google form, we have to copy and paste everything into the boxes. So if we can directly send that document, that would be easier for us, right, Prabhu?
So the challenge is actually evaluators, Vraj Vihari Prabhu's team of evaluation, which sits in different parts of the world. If we write and send, the handwritings may be different for them to
Not in a
understand.
handwriting, at least typing we can do in a document and send it to us.
But they're probably, because for them, then there'll be different modes they'll have to compile and do the evaluation. In Google form, they can download the whole thing into the template and the evaluation becomes much easy. For them to do evaluation for almost 50 students would be very, very difficult when it comes in different formats and templates. So the Google Drive brings in that consistency and standardization, which helps them to evaluate faster and easily. That's the whole idea of the Google Forms.
Okay.
It's only 3 questions, Prabhu. Cut paste won't take too long.
I mean, if we are forming the questions, then we can save it and put it aside. I mean, we are doing in multiple chunks, right? So that is the reason.
And because there are so many questions from different set of questions, people are picking 2 + 1 question. So different question, different formats, for them to bring them up together will be really big challenge. But the permutation combination will be very high.
Prabhu, the other thing here is, if we have a source where we can get the fonts right, in Google form, the fonts will not be reproduced. So that will be a problem even for the evaluators, isn't it, Prabhu?
Yes. Sorry, Prabhu, repeat that.
Prabhu, I'm sorry. Are you able to hear me now, Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhu, yes.
I meant to say, if you're giving a reference to a verse in our essays or those questions there, and we have a particular font, in Google Forms, those fonts will not be reproduced properly. And so it will be a tough thing even for the evaluators to evaluate. Instead, if you give a file as an attachment, then they can easily take the font as it is. If you embed the fonts, it will be easier even for the evaluators, isn't it, Prabhu? Or you think differently?
Probably we need to check this with them, because it again depends, what all kind of tools different people will use, because everybody's MS Word doesn't have the fonts that can copy shloka or create shlokas as such. So there could be inconsistency there as well. So maybe we'll try to check with the evaluators once, if that is a possibility. See, otherwise, many times when we repeat the shloka in English, we can just type it, not really the transliteration that our books use, but still use English as the Roman English as the language, and just type the shloka so that it's still readable in the same way. So we'll just check that with the evaluators once, if there's a possibility. Otherwise, we'll stick to the Google Forms.
If you're checking, can you just ask them whether
Yes.
a document with Balaram font?
Sure. We'll check.
Thank you.
So that's all for the day. Then we'll end the session today here, and looking forward for the next week's session with all of you. Thank you. So we'll chant once and then we can end the session for today.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Hare Rama, Rama, Hare.
Prabhu, Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Thank you, Rasa Sindhu Prabhu.
And Dhanyavad to all of you all. Thank you.